Welcome to our video. My name is John Watts. I'm a consumer protection lawyer in Alabama, and a large part of what I do is I sue debt collectors under state law and also under the federal law, the FDCPA, Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. And it's very common when we sue these debt collectors that they say to us first and then to the judge, and ultimately they try to argue to the jury. They go, what's the big deal? I mean, if here's the law, we barely went beyond the law. This is a technical violation. It's no big deal. Shouldn't even be a lawsuit about this. And I've always thought that that was odd. And one day, I can't remember the context or why I was thinking about this, but I was looking at property lines and thinking about, maybe I saw a neighbor building a fence or a building or something. And so I want to give you this illustration. Think about your property line. And let's say that from your neighbor's house to the edge of his or her property is 100 feet. Well, can he use all 100 feet of that? Yeah, it's his property. He can do what he wants with it. I mean, obviously, maybe zoning issues. We're not talking about that. But if he wants to build right up to his property line, he can do that. He wants to put a fence right on his property line, he can do that. We can't complain and say, well, you put it at the 100-foot mark, you should have put it at 98 feet. We can't say that. So if he goes all the way to the edge, no problem. But what if he goes beyond his property? So I'm going to do it this way. Maybe it's easier to see. Here's 100 feet, and he goes 101 feet. Well, it's only 1%, right? No big deal. Doesn't really matter, except it does, because that's your property. And he can't just say, well, it doesn't matter. I just barely went over to the property line. Well, that's a problem. So he builds a building and it's 1 foot over into your property. He's going to have to fix that. He's going to either have to buy the property or tear that down. Now, you could choose to ignore it, but there's also some consequences of that, things called adverse possession and things of that nature. And if you think about it, what if you ignore that 1 foot? And then he builds somewhere else and he goes 5 feet over. It's like, well, look, it's just, it's a couple more feet. Well, for most of us and most people in America, we take property lines very seriously. And we don't want our neighbor, we may love our neighbor and have a lot of respect for our neighbor, but we don't want our neighbor building a fence on our property or building a shed or an expansion to their house where they're going over our property line. And see, it doesn't matter if you have 10 acres of land and somebody builds a building 50 feet into your property. Well, really, 50 feet, and you got 10 acres? It's still a big deal. So what does this mean for debt collectors? Well, here's the line. Here's the law. And the debt collector goes right up to the edge of that. Can we complain about that? There are some people who do complain about that. Honestly, I think that's not very smart. Hey, if this is the law and they go right up to the law, no big deal. They stayed within the law. And so maybe they have 5 days to mail you a letter and they wait till day 5. Can we fuss at them for that? No. Now, would it be nice if they'd send it on day 4 or 3 or 2 or 1? Sure. But they had 5 days and they waited till day 5. No big deal. But what about if this is the law and they go right up to the edge and then they go over it? Well, there are consequences to going over it. You can't say, go back to the property example, you can't say, well, I built this big building on my property and it's, 100 feet long and 5 feet are sticking over under your property. What's the big deal? Well, it is a big deal. You're going to have to buy my property. You're going to have to tear down that building. You're going to do something to it. Same thing with the debt collector. Here's the line. Here's the law. They go right up to it, that's fine, but they go over it, there are consequences. So for example, if the law says, and it does, that they are not allowed to put false credit reporting. And so you owe $5,000 and they put that you owe $7,000. And they go, well, what's the big deal? You do owe 5, difference between 5 and 7. It's still a collection account. It's a problem. You went over that line. Or let's say you have one account with that collector, but they put 2 accounts on your credit report. They're like, well, we already put 1 on your credit report. That was legitimate. Who cares about the second one? Here's the line, and you go over the line. And so they always want to talk about technical violations, or they'll use this fancy Latin word or whatever, de minimis, and it's no big deal, it doesn't matter. Well, we sort of turn that around. Does it matter on your property? Does it matter with your rights? Does it matter if somebody, if you're stopped in traffic and somebody comes up behind you and they almost stop, but instead they crash into you? Well, that's a problem. And so there are consequences. Now, the consequences may be small or they may be huge. But the point is, if they go beyond the line, beyond the limit of the law, that's a problem. And it certainly is appropriate to look at suing them under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act and under state law. And so if you're in Alabama and we can help you with this, feel free to give us a call. We'll be happy to sort of talk you through the issues and the concepts and whether it makes sense to do it. It doesn't always make sense to do it, but a lot of times it does. 205-879-2447, or you can reach us at alabamaconsumer.com. And I appreciate you watching this video. I know this went a little bit longer, but just trying to illustrate that point, because this is the number one thing that collectors go to, besides saying we didn't do anything wrong. Then they go, okay, well, maybe we did something wrong, but it just barely. And I just want you to think about a fence or your property line as you consider your own situation. And thanks again for watching this video. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.